Hi, welcome to tutorial number 2 on driving terminology and phrases. And here we're going to talk briefly about the phrases that we use, the terminology we use when we're discussing driving techniques. There are a number of techniques that are extremely important, and they have their own special description. Now, first one is probably the most important one for a learner driver when they're starting off, but it's going to be with you for a long time, and that is what we call biting point. And it is the point at which the clutch engages with the flywheel of the engine, enabling the car to move. Most beginner drivers think that it's the gas pedal, the accelerator, that is what causes the car to move. That is not so. It's actually the clutch and the special technique that we use in controlling the clutch and moving the clutch that actually enables the car to move. So biting point, we'll describe it very briefly. Biting point is the point which is reached when you're raising the clutch pedal slowly, but it's not fully released. And being able to recognize biting point, which will be a little different in each car, but not much. That's the first essential step in learning to drive. Biting point is reached, and you can tell when you've reached it with two very simple techniques. The first of, should I say, clues. The first is the engine note dips. The sound of the engine dips very slightly, and the car, assuming you've selected first gear, the car gives a little message to you which is telling you it's ready to move off. In other words, you can feel a little surge of power there. It's straining to move off. So that's a biting point. Now, biting point's a phrase that we use many times in the early stages of tuition. Later on, when you're driving competently, it will be used less and less, and to eventually to the point where it's not used at all, because it becomes automatic then up here. You're driving hard disk up here does many things automatically when it's being programmed. Okay, the learning to drive is a programming process. So programming the hard drive up here, you're driving hard drive, and it takes a different period of time for these basic driving skills to become automatic. But it doesn't really matter whether you learn quickly or learn slowly or somewhere in between. The main aim, the main purpose of taking driving lessons is not because of any legal requirement, but so that you know exactly what to do, how to do it, when to do it, and all of that translates into being a safe and competent driver that's well able to cope with circumstances that may arise. So just to summarize biting point, now once the clutch is at biting point, there is only one thing that's stopping the car from moving, and that's the handbrake. So, as you possibly might guess now, once you've got the clutch stationary at biting point, held steadily at biting point with your left foot, and your right foot just gently caressing the gas pedal, just covering it but not actually pressing it too severely. Once you release the handbrake, the car's going to start to move. And as in our previous video, we're always going to, when we're discussing one particular point, other points are going to become apparent, and they will be discussed in greater detail. At the moment, we're just really trying to get the message across about certain terms and terminology. Okay, so you can start to learn the new language of driving. Okay, point number 2 is a phrase that we use a lot of the time, which is covering the brake. We can use the term cover for both the brake and the handbrake and any of the other pedals. Cover the clutch, cover the brake, cover the gas pedal. Cover literally means cover the pedal with your foot. That's what it means. So why do we do that? Well, covering a pedal with your foot means effectively you're getting ready to use it. Cover the handbrake, for example, means positioning your left hand over the handbrake before you're about to use it. Getting ready to use it. That's what covering means. Okay, here's an interesting one. Now, number 3, and this is what we call creep and peep. No, it's not a relic of a dance craze from back in the 70s. It's a description of the technique we use at junctions where visibility, your ability to see other traffic, is either limited or non-existent. When let's give you an example. When you've stopped correctly at a stop sign, for example, and you've got no clear visibility in either direction, you can't hope and pray that there's nothing approaching before you pull out onto the road. You've got to move forward very slowly using your biting point technique with the clutch. That's the creep. And then looking first one way and then the other. That's the peep. In other words, you can't take a chance. You've got to, before you commence and complete your maneuver, you've got to be absolutely sure that it's safe to do so. In other words, you've checked in both directions. So moving forward slowly, the creeping forward is necessary to, you might need to do it a couple of times, and you might also need to use the handbrake to steady the car if, for example, you're on a hill or a very slight incline or not absolutely level. So creeping and peeping, the creep and peep technique is really, really important. So that's a term again that we use in our learner-driver lessons. And of course, being able to move the car forward very slowly, the creep, requires exceptional clutch control. And so it is probable that we're not going to be put in that situation when we're learning to drive until we've mastered the clutch control technique and other basics in very quiet, traffic-free zones before we actually have to utilize this particular technique of creep and peep. Okay, here's another one, number 4 here, coasting. This is a phrase that describes the movement of the car forwards while your clutch is fully depressed. Now, it's a dangerous technique. It's one that we strive to eradicate from all learner drivers, and basically it can happen if, while you're changing gear and the clutch goes down, you change gear and you don't fully release the clutch. And it's very common for beginner drivers to depress the clutch far too soon when you're getting ready to come to a stop, and basically what the end result is, with the clutch fully down, whatever gear you've selected, it's not active, and so when you're coasting, the gear that you've selected isn't engaged, and therefore the car is effectively out of gear and it's out of control. It's a very common fault on a driving test, and I'm sure examiners get quite annoyed and upset when they see this demonstrated on a test, because it shows them instantly that they've not been taught and they may not have had any lessons at all. And of course that's very, very obvious to an examiner. And if you're one of the contingent that thinks you can learn to drive without having professional lessons, then you're going to be heading into not only very dangerous territory, but for yourself and any passengers and any other road users. But it's quite likely that without a firm foundation of the basics taught by a professional instructor in a professional school, you're going to be repeating the driving test time and time and time and time again. And at the current new, relatively recently revised rate here in Ireland of 75 euros a pop, this is not cheap. So it's a pity it wasn't done years ago. The cost of the driving test was subsidised by the government for many, many years, with the result that it at 35 euros a pop, it was not such a big drain on the pocket to keep repeating your test. So coasting, most important. I think one of the is worthwhile pointing out here, one of the reasons that many learner drivers use this technique is that they think that stopping the car requires the use of the clutch. It doesn't, it's only the foot brake. The clutch is used at the very last minute to prevent the engine from cutting out, from stalling, and once your clutch goes down, you will flick your gear shift into neutral, and that's the purpose of the clutch. It does not stop the car. It is not, it's part of the process, but it's not actually what stops the car. I think we have almost come to the end here now, and another term that we use is blind spot. And you may not have heard this before, but it's worth pointing out that there's a blind spot on both sides of you as the driver, and it is behind your right shoulder when you're driving on the left. In other words, that's where traffic would be coming from if they were going to be overtaking you. And if you're on the other side of the road, if you're, for example, parked on the right-hand side of the road, moving back into the left as you move off, your blind spot is going to be over your left shoulder. So both of these blind spots can only be checked by a physical twisting of the head. Your mirror is not sufficient. Mirrors will give you a certain amount of visibility, a view of what's going on behind, but to check your blind spot you must turn your head and check over your shoulder, depending on whether it's blind spot on your right or your blind spot on your left. Truck drivers have a much bigger blind spot because their vehicles are longer, and so that's another day's work to discuss how you will deal with the truck driver's blind spot when you're overtaking on a motorway. Okay, on our next video we're going to be talking about road descriptions and markings, and again so all of these will be used with your instructor